Coming up on Jerusalem Dateline, the ground invasion into Gaza City has begun as Israel faces a coordinated hate campaign. And the UN votes to back a Palestinian state, prompting Israeli ministers to call for sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. Plus, sweeping through the Middle East, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio starts off with prayer at the Western Wall and analysis on events at the UN. All this and more coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. The long-awaited ground invasion into Gaza City has begun. It comes as Israel faces a coordinated global campaign to delegitimize the Jewish state. Meanwhile, following the vote endorsing the creation of a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly last week, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio visited the Holy Land, showing a united front despite Israel's last week's strike on Hamas leaders in Qatar. Here's the latest on all these and other stories. Secretary of State Marco Rubio began his trip with a visit to the Western Wall. Even after last week's strike on Hamas leaders in Qatar, a U.S. ally, Netanyahu said the U.S.-Israel relationship is strong. Netanyahu and Rubio met to discuss a number of issues, including the war in Gaza, freedom for the hostages, and the strike against Hamas leaders in Doha.
Your presence here in Israel today is a clear message that America stands with Israel. You stand with us in the face of terror, in the face of the incredible, I would almost say, Middle Ages lies that are directed against us.
As far as the President's been clear on the ongoing issues in Gaza, and that is that every single hostage, both living and deceased, needs to be home immediately. Hamas can no longer continue to exist as an armed element that threatens the peace and security, not just of Israel, but of the world.
In New York City Friday, the UN General Assembly voted 142-10 with 12 abstentions to pass a resolution declaring a Palestinian state. Israel's UN Ambassador Danny Danon condemned the resolution.
This one-sided declaration will not be remembered as a step toward peace, only as another hollow gesture that weakens this assembly's credibility. This is not diplomacy. It is theater. It doesn't shorten the war, it prolongs it. It does not weaken Hamas, it rewards them. It does not advance negotiations, it undermines them.
The Trump administration called the vote a gift for Hamas, and after the UN vote, a number of Israeli ministers called for annexation. Israeli Justice Minister Yariv Levin called the UN decision a reward for terrorism and added the land of Israel belongs to the people of Israel. Even the UN decision will not change that. It is time to apply sovereignty to Judea, Samaria, and the Jordan Valley. This is the appropriate Zionist response. A military official confirmed the IDF is moving toward the center of Gaza City. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz released this statement Monday night. The IDF is striking with an iron fist at the terror infrastructure, and IDF soldiers are fighting bravely to create the conditions for the release of the hostages and the defeat of Hamas. There are concerns that the terror group will put the remaining hostages in harm's way to stop the Israeli advance.
Now, there was an article that I read in a newspaper just about an hour ago where Hamas said they're going to use the 20 hostages as human shields. They're going to bring them up from the dark tunnels and they're going to put them in the line of fire so that if Israel goes forward, they're going to die. And I thought that was very terrible. And I put out a statement on that. You saw that.
The statement on Truth Social warned Hamas, this is human atrocity, the likes of which few people have ever seen before. Don't let this happen or all bets are off. Release all hostages now. Speaking to a group of visiting U.S. lawmakers on Monday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel is also facing an organized campaign to delegitimize the Jewish state.
That effort to besiege Israel, not isolated as much as besiege Israel, that is orchestrated by the same forces that supported Iran. Iran's effort to put a military siege on us and ultimately choke us. We were able to break loose from that siege, and we will have to do several things to break loose from this siege that is organized by a few states. One is China, and the other is Qatar, and they are organizing an attack on Israel legitimacy in the social media of the Western world and the United States.
On CBN's Faith Nation, Jonathan Conrica said the support of the U.S. is vital as it begins its ground offensive. When we come back, a UN watchdog group exposing anti-Israel bias at the highest level. Ahead of this month's United Nations meeting, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio revoked the visas of Palestinian leaders for, quote, not complying with commitments and undermining the prospects for peace. A UN watchdog group applauded the move and said more has to be done to stand against terrorist state members. CBN's Paul Petit spoke with UN Watch's Executive Director, Hillel Neuer.
Hillel, thanks for joining us here on Jerusalem Dateline. You're a watchdog group. You monitor what goes on in the UN. Before we launch into it, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest, what grade would you give the UN right now as it pertains to actions towards Israel in this conflict going on?
Well, we're actually in minus territory, and it's really horrific to see what's happened at the United Nations. You know, just 2 weeks after Hamas made a surprise attack on Israel and sent in thousands of terrorists into Israeli communities, massacred families, took hundreds of hostages, including little babies, into Gaza. About 2 weeks after that, the head of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, said, yes, I condemn Hamas, but, he said, the attacks of Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. And he went on to enumerate numerous alleged grievances effectively justifying the Hamas attacks. And for the past 2 years, numerous key UN officials have been legitimizing Hamas.
Take me behind the scenes, and for our viewers who really don't understand the inner workings of the members there and their, I guess you would say, bias towards Israel. What happens and why?
Well, look, you know, there's sort of two aspects to the UN. One is it's an assembly of nations. There's 193 countries. Each country has their own votes, their own policies and positions. So when they meet at the UN General Assembly, sadly, the Islamic group is 56 nations led by dictatorships like the Islamic Republic of Iran, Pakistan, countries that support terrorism. Iran, of course, funds Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis. Pakistan is a key backer of the Taliban. The 56-nation Islamic group works as a cohesive bloc. They pressure countries. If you don't vote for our resolutions targeting Israel, you won't get oil, you won't get Qatari investments of billions of dollars. So the UN General Assembly, if we look at the past decade, we're talking about every year there's just one resolution on Iran, one resolution on Syria, one resolution on North Korea, and 17 against Israel. 17 condemnations of a democracy that is flawed, but the only democracy in the Middle East, 17 times more than on North Korea. So it's just astonishing bias. Hamas is never mentioned. Islamic Jihad gets a free pass. That's the UN General Assembly. And then you have the officials, Antonio Guterres, or in Geneva, the UN Human Rights Chief, Volker Turk, or other nasty officials, of course, like the infamous UN rapporteur, Francesca Albanese. So you have the member states and the officials, and many of them are scapegoating one country, the only Jewish nation, Israel.
Another battlefront has been going on with humanitarian aid, the trucks from the UN, or the trucks that the UN is supposed to bring out into Gaza, sitting at the border. What are the real numbers, and what happens from here?
Well, look, we know a few games of statistics that are being played. First, the UN the other day is counting trucks, only of the trucks that the UN brings in, but not thousands of other trucks that, for example, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is supported by the United States and Israel, which is trying to help Palestinians without embracing the Hamas organization or the Hamas political agenda. And as punishment for trying to deliver aid without all of that Hamas agenda, they're being attacked mercilessly by the UN, its agencies like UNRWA, other so-called non-governmental organizations which have a very sharp anti-Israel political agenda, like Doctors Without Borders, known as Médecins Sans Frontières, have been attacking this aid agency. Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is actually trying to help people.
Where do countries like Israel and U.S., where do we go from here in our relations to the United Nations?
President Trump is scheduled to address the opening session on September 23rd, and he will need to speak truth to power. And the United States has to stand up to this conglomerate of either open dictatorships, state-sponsoring terrorists like Qatar, which sponsors Hamas, and Turkey, which is hosting Hamas in Istanbul and other cities. They're actually, their heads of state, Erdogan and the Qatari head of state, are both going to be speaking on that day. The United States needs to tell the UN that if you don't act, we will. That should be a message for other nefarious UN officials. If you support terrorism, America will stand up, speak out, and take action. We need more of that.
Hello, Neuer. Thanks so much for your insight and for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, expert analysis on the UN General Assembly sessions now underway. Eugene Kontorovich from the Heritage Foundation specializes in constitutional and international law. And when it comes to anti-Israel moves at the UN, he's seen a lot. He joined us in the studio recently to share his expectations for this year's UN General Assembly meetings. Eugene Kontorovich here. Thanks for joining us. You're a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation. What are your expectations?
A typical Israel bashing of an organization that has essentially made itself irrelevant and just a talking shop for dictators. I think the United Nations has really done everything it can, especially since October 7th, to lose whatever moral legitimacy it had, and it's really not taken seriously anymore.
And the vote for a Palestinian state, what impact may that have?
More European countries recognizing this state, a so-called state of Palestine, but you can believe in fairies, but that doesn't make them real. And we know that they don't even believe that there's a Palestinian state. The best example of that is when Israel announced that it was going to allow the construction of some apartment buildings in the suburbs of Jerusalem. Britain and France said, no, you can't build those apartment buildings. That will prevent the creation of a Palestinian state. Wait, you're recognizing a Palestinian state now. So is there one or is there not one? It's not really a Palestinian state they're recognizing. It's simply a reward to Hamas. And that's the sad part of it.
This whole idea of a Palestinian state, legally, what does it mean?
It doesn't mean anything because it doesn't exist. But some legal reasons why a Palestinian state would be so problematic is so right now the Palestinians govern themselves. They have complete independence, autonomy. Israel's not controlling their lives. So what would a state give them that they don't have now? The ability to buy weapons on the international market and the ability to open their borders and bring in jihadis from around the world. So imagine October 7th, except this time, instead of machine guns and gliders, they have airplanes and artillery and millions of people who've come to join them on jihad from around the world. It would be the end of the state of Israel. And that's why this is something that, God forbid, and that is why it's something that Israel could not permit to happen.
Eugene, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Chris.
At the United Nations last week, after Iran, Turkey, Algeria, and Venezuela condemned Israel for striking Hamas leaders in Qatar, UN Watch Executive Director Hillel Neuer took the floor. His speech, interrupted by Pakistan, challenged Qatar directly. Take a look.
Israel targeted my country, which is a mediator in the conflict. We condemn the attack on residential buildings where members of Hamas political organization live. This is a flagrant violation of international conventions.
Our solidarity is with the state of Qatar in the face of the illegal bombing by Israel.
We condemn the Israeli attack, which has targeted the state of Qatar.
Israel's state terrorism, which we condemn, spreads to new countries and targets even the mediators. We stand with Qatar.
We also strongly condemn Israel's unlawful and heinous bombing in Qatar.
Violation of sovereignty and international law.
I now give the floor to United Nations Watch.
Mr. President, we have heard a lot about international law from the world's worst violators of international law. It's time to challenge the perpetrators. And so we ask Qatar, if you don't want targeted bombings against terrorists in your capital, why do you harbor terrorists in your capital? Terrorists who are still holding hostages, torturing them, and rejecting peace deals. Why did you host Hania, Mashal, and Al-Khaya in luxury hotels from where they planned their terror? Why did you back Hamas's Gaza coup in 2007? Why have you funneled billions since then, fueling their terror machine, empowering their 5 wars against Israel? Why did you blame Israel for October 7th, absolving Hamas of massacring 1,200 Israelis, Americans, and others? Why is your state-owned Al Jazeera serving as the terror group's non-stop propaganda arm? Why do you act as a mediator by day and a terror sponsor by night? Mr. President, the record shows Qatar is a state sponsor of terror. The Gulf states said so in 2017 when they suspended ties with Qatar. Now, yesterday, Antonio Guterres and French President Macron condemned Israel. But when the U.S. killed bin Laden in Pakistan, the UN chief at the time celebrated that, quote, justice has been done to such a mastermind of international terrorism. France called it a victory for all democracies. We ask both. How is this different? Now, when Israel captured the Nazi Adolf Eichmann, rescued the hostages at Entebbe, and destroyed Saddam's nuclear reactor, the UN condemned Israel. Each time...
Sorry, I have a point of order. Sorry, a delegation of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. While we believe in constructive engagement with the civil society organizations and value their inputs, we urge you to ensure that no speaker violates the principles and purposes of the UN Charter and the territorial integrity of sovereign member states. We reject casting unfounded accusations and allegations.
Thank you. Points of order are on procedural issues, not on substantive issues. I give the floor back to United Nations Watch for 4 seconds.
Mr. President, Pakistan is another state sponsor of terror.
Still ahead, an Israeli influencer tackles one of the most controversial subjects in international politics. Should the world recognize a Palestinian state? For social media influencer Hanania Naftali, the answer is no. We spoke to him about the reasonings behind his stance, but first, here's a clip from his recent video where he exposes the risk of Palestinian statehood and what it would mean for peace in the Middle East.
The Palestinian Authority runs its cities like a dictatorship that pays cash bonuses to convicted terrorists. That's right, the more Jews you kill, the bigger your paycheck. That's their policy, the pay-to-slay policy. And their schools? Kids are taught that Israel doesn't exist and that killing Jews is an act of honor. Streets are named after suicide bombers. This is the political culture the West is about to rubber stamp as a sovereign nation. And here's what you're not being told. Once a state is recognized, it's permanent. There's no undo button when it turns into a terror launchpad.
Hanania Naftali, thanks for joining us. You did a reel recently. It's called Why Recognizing Palestine is a Global Disaster. What were you trying to communicate through this reel?
Well, look, I think that recognizing Palestine, especially after October 7th, it's basically rewarding Hamas because we already see that there is a de facto Palestinian state and it's in Gaza. What did we get in return for that de facto Palestinian state? Nothing but terror, rockets, and violence. The European leaders that want to recognize Palestine, they're basically rewarding terrorism because they're only encouraging and adding more fuel in this terror machine called Hamas. But if you want to talk about the historical facts, so obviously, in my opinion, Palestine exists today and it's in Jordan. The majority of the population of Jordan today, they are Palestinians, so they already have a Palestinian state. We only have one Jewish state, and we need to hold on to that one Jewish state that we have. We don't ask for more states. We have only one, and we only want to keep that one that we have.
Yeah, last Friday, the UN General Assembly voted 142 to 10 against and 12 abstained to recognize a Palestinian state. What do you think is the significance of that vote?
I think the UN has lost all of its moral compass, and we've seen it time and time again when the UN was rewarding, again, Iran, for example, by placing it as head of the UN Women Committee plotting North Korea and Syria. You see that they're very persistent in their obsession with Israel. They keep passing resolutions against the one democracy in the Middle East. I served in the army. We are the most moral army in the world. I was never taught or commanded to target Palestinian people. No army in the world is dropping leaflets warning civilians, losing the element of surprise just to keep Palestinian civilians alive. So when you look at the UN, I don't think that they are an example to moral clarity. Actually, Israel is. And in my opinion, the UN should be dismantled, reformed, because it is actually, it became a political body that pursues after politics and not justice or human rights.
Hanania, what would you say to Gen Z when they're hearing chants like from the river to the sea, Palestine would be free? What would you say to them?
Well, I would encourage Gen Z to look and research and try to dig deep into the facts, because on the surface, the chants like Free Palestine sound very appealing. It's a movement to liberate an occupied nation. These are the kind of lies that they're selling in order to gain publicity and sympathy among Gen Z. But when you actually research and look into things like that, you learn that this is a genocidal chant against the Jewish people that have returned to their ancestral homeland. So I think that questions must be asked, because when you ask serious and tough questions, you reach to conclusions. And you will learn that Israel is fighting not just for herself, but for the survival of Western civilization. Because when you're in the Middle East, you learn that this is a tough neighborhood. But you will also learn that Israel is not perfect, but there are no perfect countries. But Israel sets an example of how wars should be conducted. And also keep in mind, Israel did not start this war. We want to end this war. So my message to Gen Z is to ask questions and don't believe what you are being told by the mainstream media.
In our last segment, Hanania Naftali spoke about Israel being in a rough neighborhood. Proof of that has been the decimation of Israeli agriculture from missiles coming over the border. That's created food insecurity, which one group in country has tried to address. And thanks to its partnership with CBN Israel, it's helping to get people fed.
Leket is in the salvage business, rescuing produce and meals that might otherwise get thrown away and delivering them to Israelis in need. Leket has been around for more than 20 years and rescues 35,000 tons of food annually. 100,000 volunteers glean from 800 farmers across Israel and take donations from 120 food suppliers and catering services, all to get healthy produce and meals to Israelis who need help with the next meal. CBN partners make this happen through financial support to Leket.
Thank all your viewers and everybody that's in the CBN community for the charity and for the support to Leket Israel. It's the tremendous support that's been going on for years, and we're so pleased and happy to be able to do what we do with CBN's support. It's extremely important for us, and we hope that this partnership will continue for a long while. So thank you to the CBN community.
What a wonderful organization, and CBN partners are standing with them to help Israelis. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. And please keep praying for Israel, the IDF soldiers, and all those caught in harm's way. And as always, pray that the hostages come home safely and soon. I'm Chris Mitchell. For all of us here at the Jerusalem Bureau, we'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.